The words scraped out of Willa Redbird's throat like sand and sorrow. Her cracked lips barely moved as she spoke them into the open air where no one but the trees listened. Her arms trembled beneath the weight of her 4-year-old son, Luke, who had gone limp against her shoulder hours ago, fevered, silent, and scalding hot. She hadn't had water since yesterday morning. Hadn't eaten in 2. Every step was agony now, every heartbeat a drum against her ribs. The sun loomed high over the Bitterroot Mountains, beating down like judgment. Her breath came shallow. Her boots were splitting at the seams, her hands bloodied from falls she couldn't even remember. She had no destination, just a desperate direction forward. Luke whimpered against her neck. "Mama." Water. Her throat burned too much to answer. She kissed his forehead and kept walking. The trail, if it could even be called that, cut along a ridge of dry rock and twisted pine. Far below, the land dropped into a basin where green shimmered faintly through heat haze. She blinked, squinting. Was that a roof smoke or just another cruel trick of her mind? Her knees buckled. She collapsed hard, barely managing to turn, so Luke didn't hit the ground first. Dust and pine needles filled her mouth. She coughed, then sobbed dryly. "Please," she whispered to no one. "Just once, let this not be a lie." A sound broke the silence. Boots on stone. Not fast, not friendly, but real. She tried to lift her head. A man stood at the edge of the trees, broad-shouldered, tall, long black hair tied with leather. A rifle rested across his back, one hand near the hilt of a knife. His face was shadowed beneath a furrowed brow, skin bronzed like aged leather. He wore no hat, just a simple shirt half unbuttoned and trousers tucked into boots caked in trail dust. He looked like he belonged to the land carved from it. Willa's voice cracked out brittle and raw. "Help him, please." The man approached slowly, warily. He crouched beside her and studied the boy in her arms, then looked at her. "How long's he been burning?" he asked, voice low, rasping, like it hadn't been used in days. "Yesterday. Maybe before," she rasped. "He's all I have." The man didn't speak again. He reached down, slid his arms under Luke, and lifted the boy with surprising gentleness. Willa's instincts flared. "No, give him back." She tried to lunge, but her body failed. "If you want him alive," the man said calmly, "you'll follow me." And then he turned and started walking. She tried to crawl. Her hands trembled. Every part of her ached. But when she saw Luke's head nestled against the stranger's shoulder, she screamed inside herself to move, to fight, to follow. Somehow she did. The cabin was real. Half hidden among tall cedars, moss-covered and sun-silvered, it looked like it had been there 100 years. Smoke puffed from a chimney. Chickens clucked in a pen. The door hung open. He carried Luke inside. She staggered after them. Inside, it smelled of smoke, pine, and something bitter like dried herbs. The air was cool and dim, filtered through heavy curtains. The man laid Luke on a cot near the fireplace. He moved quickly, but with care, fetching a jug of water from a clay cistern in the corner. He filled a cup and touched it to Luke's lips. "Small sips," he murmured. Luke swallowed. A tear slid down Willa's cheek. Who are you?" she rasped. He glanced at her. "Name's Hawk. Just Hawk and Chaska. Most folks only use the first part." He stood and handed her a cup. She drank too fast and choked. He didn't reach for her, just waited. She finished the cup and held it close to her chest, like a sacred thing. "You live here?" she asked. "Far enough from people to call it peace." He knelt beside Luke again, placed a hand on the boy's chest, then on his forehead. His brow furrowed. "He'll need more than water," Hawk said. "I've got tea. Bark roots. Might help." Willa nodded. "I'll pay you. I can cook clean whatever you need. I don't want charity." His eyes flicked to hers. "Don't want company either. But the boy stays. So you do too." She blinked. "Why are you helping us?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood and moved to the hearth where a kettle sat. He poured dried bark and leaves into a cloth bundle, tied it, and dropped it into the pot. Only then did he speak. "I buried my wife and child just beyond that ridge." His voice was even without emotion. 5 years back. I don't do ghosts, and I don't do graves twice." Willa stared. "You're not a priest," she said. He shrugged. "Didn't say I was." He returned to Luke, lifted his small head, and offered the bitter tea. Luke sipped. Willa knelt beside them. She reached out and touched her son's hand. His fingers curled faintly around hers. She broke. Tears came suddenly, silently. "Thank you," she whispered. Hawk stood and walked to the door. He paused there, one hand on the frame. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "Storm's coming." She turned to look outside. The wind had shifted. The sky was heavy gray-purple. Somewhere distant thunder rolled. She looked back at Hawk. What kind of storm he didn't turn? The kind that finds what you love and tries to take it. Lightning split the sky in half. The thunder followed hard and fast, like something ripping the heavens open. Rain came next, slamming the roof in violent waves. The sound should have been comforting proof they were inside dry safe, but it wasn't. Not for Willa. Luke was burning up again. She sat at his side, one hand pressed to his forehead. It was like touching a stovetop. His skin was boiling red with fever. His breathing was fast, too fast. His body trembled now and then, as if some part of him was trying to fight the heat and failing. She'd been praying for days. Now her prayers came as whispers barely formed. "Please," she muttered. "Please, not this way." Outside, the thunder cracked again. Luke let out a soft moan, then jerked upright with a sharp, choking sound. His limbs snapped taut. His eyes rolled back. "No, no, no, no," Willa cried out. He was seizing. She reached to hold him steady, but her hands were shaking too. His body thrashed, and she fought to keep him from falling off the cot. Her voice rose over the wind and the pounding of rain on the roof. "Hawk," she screamed. "Hawk, he's seizing!" The door didn't open. She rushed to it, threw it wide. The wind hit her like a slap. Rain blinded her. "Hawk, please." Still nothing. Just trees bending in the storm, their branches lashing the sky. She turned back. Luke was convulsing, his fists, clenched jaw locked. Her hands trembled. Her mind screamed useless thoughts. Then the door slammed open behind her. Hawk charged in, soaked through mud, clinging to his boots. A rabbit swung by the legs from his belt. His eyes immediately locked on the boy. His body stiffened, but he didn't hesitate. He dropped the rabbit and peeled off his coat, letting it fall to the floor in a wet heap. He knelt beside Luke. "Get me the leather satchel by the hearth," he said, voice firm, cold, focused. Willa scrambled to obey. She found it brown, worn, weather-stained, and brought it to him with both hands. He opened it fast, pulled out dried leaves, a small tin, a flask of whiskey, and a narrow bone spoon. His fingers moved with the certainty of a man who'd done this before. "Feverfew, willow bark. Whiskey," he muttered. "What do I do?" she asked. "Hold him upright. We've got to break the seizure." She moved behind the boy and lifted him her arms around his small body. Hawk crushed the leaves in his palm, poured a few drops from a glass vial into the mix, then added a splash of whiskey and stirred it into a gritty paste. "Luke," he said, crouching close, "you ever look death in the eye and tell it to wait its damn turn?" Willa blinked. The line came out of nowhere, sharp and raw. It hit her right in the chest. Luke whimpered. Hawk brought the spoon to his lips. "Easy," he said, "slow sips." He dripped the medicine into the boy's mouth. Luke gagged once but swallowed. Hawk rubbed his back, murmuring something low and rhythmic in another language. Salish, Willa guessed. A prayer, maybe. It sounded old, meant for more than just ears. The storm raged outside, but in the cabin a fragile stillness took root. Luke's tremors began to ease. His breath slowed. The fever hadn't gone, but the convulsions stopped. He slumped forward exhausted, and Willa clutched him tightly. "He's sleeping," Hawk said. "That's all." She laid Luke gently back onto the cot and sat beside him, her hands shaking harder than ever. Her eyes blurred with tears, but she didn't let them fall, not yet. "Thank you," she whispered. Hawk didn't answer. He stood crossed to the stove and poured hot broth into a wooden cup. He brought it to her and placed it in her hands. She drank slowly, the warmth settling in her stomach like something sacred. She hadn't realized how cold she was until that moment. "I thought he was going to die," she said. "He still might." Hawk said, "But not tonight." She looked up. He was peeling off his soaked shirt and hanging it near the fire. The muscles in his back were marked with scars, some thin and long, others round and faded. His whole body looked like it had lived through wars. "How do you know how to do all this?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. "I lost a child too," he said at last. "Years ago. I held on too long. Thought I could beat death with will alone." She swallowed. "Did you?" He turned slightly, just enough for her to see the pain behind his eyes. "No. But I learned what to look for. What helps, what kills." She dropped her gaze to the cup in her lap. The storm had begun to soften. Thunder rolled off into the distance. The fire hissed. Luke mumbled in his sleep. She reached over, smoothed his hair back. It was damp with sweat, but his breathing was steady now. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "Don't," Hawk replied. "Just keep him alive." Dawn came quiet, wrapped in mist. Willa awoke with her head resting beside Luke's legs. He was still asleep, curled on his side. His forehead was cooler. The color had started to return to his cheeks. She stood slowly and moved to the door. Hawk was already outside. Shirtless, splitting logs with deliberate swings. Steam rose off his skin as the morning chill wrapped around him. "You didn't sleep," she said. He didn't pause, didn't need to. She stepped onto the porch. The wood was cool beneath her bare feet. "You saved him." He didn't reply. Hawk. He stopped mid-swing, turned to look at her. "Why did you do it?" she asked. A beat passed. "Because I couldn't save mine," he said. There was nothing to say after that. He tossed another log onto the pile, then reached for his coat. "There's someone nearby I want you to meet," he said. "Who, Emmeline Dove?" he replied. "Healer, Salish elder. She'll know more about Luke's fever, and maybe more than that." Willa glanced back at the cabin. "At her son, she won't turn us away?" she asked. "She doesn't turn away people with sorrow in their eyes," Hawk said. Willa nodded slowly. "Let's go," she said. Willa had never liked riding horses. but she clung to the saddle now like it was the only solid thing left in the world. Hawk led the way on a paint mare named Raven, silent as always, while Willa and Luke followed behind on an older gelding he called Whiskey. The storm had passed, leaving the land soaked and glinting beneath a pale morning sun. Fog lingered between the trees, like ghosts that hadn't yet decided whether to stay or go. Willa adjusted the blanket around Luke's shoulders. He was still weak, but alert, resting against her front, his small hands fisted into the folds of her coat. "Where are we going again?" she asked, mostly to fill the silence. "To see poor Emmeline Dovehawk," answered without turning around. "She a doctor?" "No," he said. "Better." The trail narrowed beneath towering pines. Birds rustled through the canopy, but the woods themselves felt strangely reverent. Willa couldn't shake the unease blooming in her gut. Hawk rode tight in the shoulders, his posture rigid, jaw clenched. This wasn't just a house call. This was something else. Nearly an hour passed before they reached a clearing. At the center stood a round lodge made of earth and clay and timber, low and moss-covered, blending into the forest, as if it had grown there. Smoke curled from a crooked chimney, and wind chimes made from bone and shell clinked softly in the breeze. A spiral garden of herbs and sunflowers framed the lodge like a halo. Willa stopped the horse and stared. A woman stood on the porch, barefoot and waiting. She was tall and straight, with silver hair braided down her back and tied off in turquoise ribbon. Her skin was lined, her eyes dark and cutting, as if time had carved wisdom straight into her bones. She looked like someone who had known loss and stood upright through every moment of it. "You brought shadows with you, Chaska," she said, her voice smooth but hard to read. "Didn't come for me," Hawk said as he dismounted. "Came for the boy." Willa climbed down with Luke in her arms. The woman looked them over, and it felt like she saw everything: illness, exhaustion, fear, and the things Willa hadn't even named yet. Finally she spoke. "This boy carries more than sickness." Willa bristled. "What do you mean?" The woman Emmeline didn't explain. She simply turned and opened the door. "Come in." Inside the lodge was warm and dim. Golden light filtered in through high windows, catching on suspended bundles of sage yarrow and lavender. The smell was thick smoke, earth, mint, and memory. Everything felt slow and sacred, like stepping into a place the world forgot. Willa settled near the hearth, Luke curled against her. Emmeline crouched beside them, her hands calloused but gentle. She placed one palm on Luke's forehead, another on his chest, and closed her eyes. Her lips moved in quiet prayer, Salish words, ancient and soft. After a moment she pulled back and opened her eyes. "His body fights," she said, "but he's carrying something else. A grief that isn't his. He's too small to understand it, so he holds it like a fever." Willa's throat tightened. "He's lost everything." "We both have." "Tell me," Emmeline said. And Willa did. She told her about the mining town, the sickness that spread through it like poison, the fire that swept it away. How she and Luke escaped with nothing. How they'd hidden, moved, begged. How she watched her son grow quiet in the back of wagons in strange towns, sleeping with his face to the wall. She left out the man she ran from. But Emmeline didn't ask. When Luke finally drifted into sleep, Emmeline wrapped him in a thick wool blanket and whispered blessings over him. Hawk pulled Willa aside. "She knew we were coming," he said. Willa's brow furrowed. "How?" "She always knows." "Are you afraid of her?" "No," Hawk said. "I'm afraid of what she sees." Outside, the wind began to rise, stirring the trees. Emmeline stood in the doorway watching the forest like it might speak to her. "You should stay the night," she said. "Will it help him?" Willa asked. "No," Emmeline replied, "but it will help you." Dinner was simple but rich: roasted squash, wild rice, dried berries, smoked fish. Emmeline didn't press. When she did speak, her questions didn't seek facts, but truths. What name do you speak when no one listens? What fear have you worn so long it fits like skin? What did you bury that still dreams of waking? Willa had no answers. But each question loosened something inside her. Emmeline wasn't just a healer. She was a mirror. Later, as night draped itself over the cabin, Willa lay beside Luke on a wool pallet near the fire. Hawk sat at the edge of the room, sharpening a knife slowly. The rhythmic scrape was oddly calming. The fire cracked low. Willa dozed and dreamed. In the dream, she stood at the edge of a river of flame. People screamed. A child cried. A man shouted her name, but it wasn't Hawk. It was someone else. Smoke poured from windows, clawing toward the sky. Through the haze, a face emerged. Emmeline. "You think you left the worst behind," she said, "but it walks beside you." Willa woke with a jolt. The fire had faded to coals. Sweat dampened her neck. She sat up. Luke was sleeping soundly beside her, but Hawk's bedroll was empty. She stood and crept to the door. His coat still hung by the hearth. She opened the door and stepped outside barefoot. The night air was cold. Moonlight bathed the clearing in silver. Trees swayed gently. In the distance, she heard the faint sound of hooves. Not fast, slow, and steady. Then nothing. No wind. No sound. Just silence. And that same voice from her dream, not spoken aloud, but felt in her bones. "He has ghosts of his own," it said, "and they ride at night." The sun rose slow and pale over Emmeline's clearing, but the light did little to warm the chill in Willa's chest. Hawk was gone. His coat still hung by the hearth, his bedroll undisturbed, but he'd taken his knife and saddle, and the faint imprint of boot prints in the soft mud outside the door told her everything she needed to know. He hadn't gone for firewood. He'd left. She stood on the porch, arms crossed tight against her ribs, watching the forest breathe. Mist rolled through the trees in soft curls, and birds sang like nothing had changed. But something had. She felt it in her bones. Behind her, Emmeline stepped into the light with a shawl wrapped around her shoulders, and a calm that didn't belong to this moment. "You heard him ride out," Willa said without turning. "I did." "Why didn't you stop him?" "Because he wasn't running from me." Willa turned, heat sparking in her throat. "He didn't even say anything." "He said more than most men ever do," Emmeline replied, "but not with words." Willa blinked hard, angry at the sting behind her eyes. She hadn't asked Hawk to stay, hadn't expected him to care. But he'd saved Luke, sat beside them in silence, shared more through one steady look than anyone had in years. "He'll come back," Emmeline added. "You seem sure of that." "I'm not," the older woman said. "But I believe in return more than I believe in goodbye." Willa shook her head and stepped off the porch, boots crunching over gravel. She walked the edge of the garden, hands in her coat pockets, heart tugging in two directions. Luke was still asleep. He needed rest. Safety. But part of her wanted to ride out after Hawk, to demand answers, to ask what he was looking for in the dark and why he thought he had to find it alone. "You think I'm a coward for staying?" Willa asked suddenly. "No," Emmeline said from behind her. "Sometimes staying behind is the bravest thing you can do." Willa stood still a moment longer, then turned back toward the house. She needed coffee, something to burn the fog from her head. Inside, the hearth glowed low. She stoked it to life and boiled water in a dented kettle. As it heated, her eyes landed on the coat Hawk had left behind. She crossed the room and ran her fingers over the collar. It was wool worn soft with age. There was a tear near the shoulder, hand-stitched with black thread. A strange ache bloomed in her chest. Then her fingers brushed something tucked inside the lining. She pulled it free. A folded piece of paper. Her name was written across the front in bold, slow letters, Willa. She sat down and opened it carefully. Inside, in writing, both clean and deliberate, were only 3 lines I had to go before I looked back. There are things I need to settle. Don't follow unless you're ready to see who I really am. There was no signature, just white space. Her hand curled around the letter, gripping it tighter than she meant to. "What the hell does that even mean?" she whispered. "Who he really is." She stood, abruptly paced once, twice. Her boots scuffed the floor. He thought she'd follow, or he hoped she wouldn't. She didn't know which. Later that morning, Willa sat by the creek that ran behind the lodge. Luke was awake now, sitting beside her with a piece of bread in one hand and a stick in the other, poking at the water. His fever hadn't returned, but his energy was still low. He leaned against her thigh like a pup, curling close to its mother. "Do you think he's okay?" Luke asked suddenly. "Who?" Willa pretended. "You know who?" She sighed. "I don't know. He's doing what he thinks he has to." Luke stared at the rippling water. "I liked him." "I know, sweetheart." A pause. "I think you liked him too," he added quietly. Willa didn't answer right away. "Then, yeah, I did." Another silence passed, heavy with things neither of them knew how to say. "Will he come back?" Luke asked. Willa looked up at the trees, their branches swaying in the breeze. "I don't know," she said honestly, "but sometimes folks leave so they can learn how to come back." Luke nodded like that made perfect sense. They stayed like that for a long time, listening to the creek and the wind. By midday, Willa was chopping wood behind the lodge, sleeves rolled and jaw clenched. Each swing of the axe landed harder than the last. Emmeline watched from the porch, but said nothing. When Willa finally stopped chest heaving, she leaned on the axe and looked toward the trail. "You think he left because of me?" Emmeline stood, stepped down the porch, and walked over slowly. Her gaze was soft but unflinching. "No," she said. "He left because of what's behind him. And because he thought staying would mean dragging that into your life." Willa shook her head. "That's not fair. He doesn't get to decide what I can handle." "No," Emmeline agreed. "But fear doesn't ask permission." Willa let the axe fall. Her hands trembled from the weight of it all. Loss, hope, confusion. "I ran too," she said. "From a man who hurt me. From a town that burned. I didn't even bury my sister. Just left her behind." Emmeline said nothing. Just placed a hand on her shoulder. Willa closed her eyes. "We all run," she whispered. "The question is, what makes us stop?" That night, after Luke was asleep and the fire burned low again, Willa sat at the table and unfolded Hawk's note one more time. She read it slowly, then folded it back, pressed it flat. Finally, she stood. "I'm going after him," she said quietly. Emmeline looked up from her chair in the corner, not surprised. "I figured. I need to know what he's running from, what he's trying to protect us from." "You're not afraid?" Emmeline asked. Willa thought of her sister's grave she never visited, the child she nearly lost, the man who looked at her like she wasn't broken, just bruised. "I'm more afraid of not knowing," she said. Emmeline nodded once. Then right at dawn, Willa looked toward the room where Luke slept. "He comes with me." "No," Emmeline said. "He stays here. He needs healing, not trails and ghosts." Willa hesitated, then nodded. "Take care of him." Emmeline smiled. "Like he's my own." Willa turned, stepping out onto the porch. The stars above the clearing blinked cold and steady. She tightened her coat and whispered into the wind. "I'm coming, Hawk." The wind carried the scent of pine and river silt as Willa guided Whiskey down the mountain trail, her eyes fixed on the narrow path that wound like a scar through the hills. Morning sun filtered through the trees, but it offered little warmth. Her breath steamed in the cold air, and the horse's hooves kicked up damp leaves with every slow, deliberate step. She hadn't ridden alone since before Luke was born. She hadn't wanted to. But something inside her, something rooted and raw, drove her forward now. Hawk's note burned in her coat pocket. "I had to go before I looked back." She thought about those words over and over like they were a trail marker she couldn't ignore. Every bend in the path brought a new piece of wilderness, broken branches, old wagon ruts, a feather caught on a thorn. He had passed through here. She could feel it in her chest like a tuning fork. The first sign of trouble came near the ridge. Hoof prints. 2 sets. Not one. Willa dismounted and knelt by the prints, pressing her fingers into the damp soil. One belonged to Raven. The other, heavier, deeper. A second rider. One with a larger horse and a rougher hand. She stood slowly scanning the tree line. A crow screamed overhead and flew east. She followed it. By midday, she reached the edge of the Bitterroot River. The water ran fast and wide, fed by melting snow and spring storms. A fallen tree formed a natural bridge across one bend. Hawk's boot prints led straight across it, but the second set didn't. Instead, they circled, waited, then vanished into the trees like smoke. Willa crossed carefully, her palms, sweating knees bent low as she steadied herself with each slow step. The bark was slick and the river below roared like it wanted her bones, but she made it across. That's when she saw him. A man stood just past the tree line. Tall, broad, dressed in a long oilskin coat stained with trail mud. His hat was low, his boots worn to the sole. A rifle hung over one shoulder, and he chewed something slowly as he watched her with a gaze flat as a blade. "Don't mean to startle you," he said. "Figured you saw me already." "I saw you," Willa said, voice steady despite the tremor in her spine. "You tracking the man who came through here, I might be." The man stepped forward just enough to catch the light. "He left about 2 hours ago." "Alone?" Willa narrowed her eyes. "How do you know him? I don't. But I know the look of a man dragging more weight behind him than he carries in his saddlebags." She studied the man carefully. He wasn't hostile, but he wasn't harmless either. "I've been riding for 2 days," she said, "and I'm not turning back now." The man nodded once. "Didn't say you should." He pointed down the trail. "You'll find a split up ahead. Left goes to the bluff, right to the old ranger post." He went left. Willa squinted. "Why tell me this?" He gave a half smile, slow and unreadable. "Sometimes the one you chase ain't the one you find." She wanted to ask what he meant, but something in his voice warned her not to. She nodded once, then mounted again. As she rode away, she looked back just once. The man was gone. The bluff rose like a spine of old stone above the forest. Hawk's tracks led through a thicket of ash and cypress, up a dry trail cut into the ridge. By the time Willa reached the top, the sun had begun to dip. The wind carried a strange stillness, no birdsong, no rustle, just breath and dust and quiet. She tied Whiskey to a tree and walked the last stretch on foot. And then she saw him. Hawk sat on the edge of the bluff, legs dangling over the drop. His coat was gone, his shirt rolled to the elbows. His back was to her shoulders, hunched. Beside him lay his saddlebag, a canteen, and something wrapped in cloth. She stepped on a stick by accident. He didn't turn. "I figured you might come," he said. "You left without a word. I left a note. You knew that wasn't enough." Silence stretched between them like thread pulled tight. "I didn't want you to see this part," he said finally. Willa walked closer. "What part is that?" He turned then, and she saw it. Tears. Not many. Just one or two, like he hadn't cried in years and didn't quite remember how. His face looked older in that light shadows, carving the truth across his cheekbones. He motioned toward the cloth bundle. She knelt beside it and opened it slowly. Inside were bones, small, delicate, carefully wrapped in linen and wildflowers now dry and crumbling at the edges. A child. "I come here every year," he said. Her name was Naya. Willa didn't speak, didn't try to offer comfort. She just sat beside him and listened. She died during the harsh winter 4 years ago. Fever took her quick. I buried her near this bluff because she loved the view. She used to climb rocks just to see the sunrise from here. He rubbed his hands together as if trying to scrape off the memory. "She was my daughter, my only one." Willa whispered, "I'm sorry. She was all I had left from before the raids, before everything turned to ash. I wasn't there when she got sick. I was away trying to trade for medicine. Came back too late." His voice cracked. "Just once." Willa closed her eyes. "You blame yourself. Every day." They sat in silence a long time. The wind moved gently like it was afraid to intrude. Finally, Willa asked, "Why now?" "Because I started to feel again," he said, "and it scared the hell out of me." She nodded. "Feeling does that." They stayed until the sky turned violet and the stars blinked awake. Hawk finally stood. "She would have liked you," he said. Willa stood too. "She still can." He turned to her eyes, steady. "I thought I was done with the world. That helping you and Luke, that was the last good thing I had left. And now," he took a long breath, "now I think there's more. But I had to come here to bury the weight before I carried anything else." Willa reached out, took his hand. "You don't have to carry it alone." He nodded slowly. Together they buried the bones beneath the old pine that marked the edge of the bluff. Willa laid a small stone atop the mound. Hawk carved Naya's name into the bark with his knife, each stroke careful, sacred. As they packed to leave, he looked at her. "I'm glad you came." She smiled, tired and true. "I wasn't sure I'd find you." He touched her arm. "You found more than I wanted you to, but maybe that's what I needed." They rode back in darkness, the trail lit by starlight and memory. They reached Emmeline's lodge just as the sun disappeared behind the hills, the forest stained gold and blood orange like a wound half healed. Hawk rode a step ahead of Willa, his shoulders taut, eyes locked on the trail, as if he sensed something before he saw it. And he did. The first sign was the silence. No wind chimes, no smoke from the chimney. The air hung too still. Willa slowed her horse and scanned the clearing. The garden had been trampled, herbs flattened. The stalks of Emmeline's sacred sunflowers snapped mid-stem. A woven basket lay overturned in the dirt, its contents scattered roots, cloth, a broken jar of honey. The front door hung open, creaking faintly as it swayed. Willa's throat tightened. Luke. She didn't wait. She leapt from the saddle and ran for the door, Hawk on her heels, his hand instinctively brushing the butt of the revolver at his side. The lodge was empty. The fire was out. Chairs overturned. A mug shattered near the hearth. Willa stepped through the chaos, heart pounding, searching blankets, crumpled a stool broken, but no blood. No Luke. Luke, she called, her voice cracking. Luke, baby, it's Mama. No answer. She turned eyes wide and wild. He was here. Emmeline said she'd wait, Hawk said, crossing to the back wall. There's something. He knelt near the pallet where Luke had slept. The wool blanket was gone, but a feather lay in its place, dark, thick, longer than a hawk's, with a red thread tied near the base. Hawk lifted it slowly. That's no accident, he muttered. That's a message. What kind of message? Willa snapped. What does it mean? Hawk turned to her. It means whoever took him wanted us to know it wasn't random. They left a marker. He held up the feather, his jaw set like stone. This is Black Elk's tribe. Willa froze. I thought they were gone. Most were. Some scattered after the raids. But a few. They went dark. Hid in the foothills. Black Elk had a son named Rafe. Twisted man. Took to bounty work. Had a grudge against anyone who turned settler. Willa's stomach sank. Why would they take Luke? Not sure yet. Could be leverage. Could be revenge. Willa's knees buckled and she sat on the cold floor, breathing shallow. He's just a boy, she whispered. He's already lost so much. Hawk placed a steady hand on her shoulder. They won't kill him, he said. Not if they think he's useful. And we've still got time. Willa lifted her head. So what do? We track them, Hawk said, already moving. And we move fast. They rode out that night under a rising moon. The trail was faint, but their bent branches snapped twigs, the occasional smear of boot print in soft mud. Hawk followed it like a ghost from his past eyes, sharp body tense with memory. They move in circles, he said. It's how they lose most men. Double back, split off, leave false signs. How do you know? I've hunted them before. Willa didn't ask when. She could see it in his face. This wasn't the first child taken. This was something older. Deeper. They crossed the river at dawn, wet and cold, boots filling with silt. On the far side, they found a fire pit still warm. Willa knelt near it and picked up a burnt scrap of Emmeline's shawl. They took her too, she murmured. She might have gone willingly, Hawk said. They respect her. If she thought she could protect Luke. He trailed off. Willa didn't need the rest of the sentence. They followed the trail into a canyon choked with mist. Hawk stopped often, scanning the ridges, sniffing the wind like a bloodhound. Then they heard it, a child's voice. Soft, hoarse, calling Mama. Willa spurred her horse forward, but Hawk grabbed the reins. Wait! She turned furious. That's Luke. No, he said. It's not. The voice came again, closer now. But it didn't sound right, too rhythmic, too steady. It's a lure, Hawk said. They mimic. It's an old war trick. A stone landed at their feet. Then another. Shadows moved above them on the ridge. Riders Hawk shouted. A figure leapt from the rocks. Hawk fired once, the shot echoing through the canyon, and the attacker fell groaning. Another followed, swinging a club. Willa ducked, then slammed her boot into his side, knocking him off balance. Hawk finished him with a quick strike. Two more emerged from the trees. Hawk reloaded fast. One went down, the other ran. Willa gasped for breath, heart slamming. Was that all of them, she asked. Hawk scanned the ridge. No, just a scout group. The real camp's close. He crouched near one of the fallen men, searched his coat, and pulled out a crude map drawn on birch bark. There, he said, tapping it. 2 miles north, hidden in the limestone caves. Willa stood beside him. Her knuckles were white around the handle of her blade. We go now, she said. We don't stop. He looked at her, really looked. You're not the same woman I found in the snow. No, she said. I'm the one who's going to get her son back. The limestone caves were carved into the side of a wind-blasted cliff, half hidden behind fallen trees and shadows. Smoke curled from a fissure near the base, faint and oily. They left the horses tethered and approached on foot. Keep low, Hawk said, and whatever happens, don't let them separate us. Inside, the cave widened into a hollowed-out chamber lit by torchlight. Shapes moved in the gloom, 3, maybe 4 figures, and at the far end, bound to a post near the fire, was Luke. His head snapped up as they entered. Mama Willa didn't think. She ran. A man stepped in her path, Rafe. His eyes gleamed like knives. Looking for this, he said, nodding toward Luke. Let him go, she growled. Or what? She'll kill you, Hawk said from behind him. Rafe turned. Chaska, he said mockingly. Didn't think you'd show your face again. You should have kept to the mountains and let you live like a white man with a ranch and a name. You chose this, Hawk said. Rafe raised a knife. So did she. That was his mistake. Willa lunged, blade flashing. She slashed across his arm, and he dropped the knife with a grunt. Hawk slammed into him, driving both of them into the wall. Another man charged. Willa ducked and swung her fist, connecting with bone. Hawk knocked the last one unconscious with the butt of his revolver. The fight was over in seconds. Willa rushed to Luke, cutting the rope with shaking hands. He clung to her, sobbing. Mama, I knew you'd come. She kissed his head. I'd burn the world if I had to. Later, as they rode from the canyon, Hawk glanced over his shoulder at the smoke rising behind them. They won't stay down for long, he said. Willa adjusted Luke's blanket. Then let them come, she said. We'll be ready. Hawk nodded, but his eyes darkened. Sometimes the past doesn't stay buried, he murmured. It digs itself out. Willa looked forward, jaw set. Then we bury it deeper next time. By the time they returned to Emmeline's lodge, the wind had shifted. The clouds hung low, swollen and bruised with the weight of an incoming storm. Willa kept Luke wrapped tight in her shawl, one hand resting protectively over his back, the other gripping the reins. Every ache in her body burned, but she didn't loosen her hold, not for a second. Emmeline stood on the porch, a gash above her left brow, and a fresh limp in her step. But her arms were open. She took Luke from Willa without a word, clutching him to her chest, like a lost prayer finally answered. Willa stepped back and let herself breathe. Hawk hovered near the corral, eyes scanning the tree line. He hadn't spoken much since they left the canyon. Something heavy had settled over him again, like the ghosts were clawing back out from their graves. Later, after Emmeline tended to Luke's scrapes and gave him a warm bowl of elk stew, Willa found Hawk by the creek, skipping stones in silence. The muscles in his jaw flexed with every throw. She sat beside him and waited. You all right? She asked after a moment. Wasn't supposed to be like that, he said. I promised you safety, and the first thing I did was lead trouble to your door. You didn't lead it, Willa said. It was already on our heels. You just helped us turn and face it. He looked at her then. Really looked. Before either of them could speak, hoofbeats thundered down the ridge. Both stood instantly. Hawk's hand flew to his hip. Willa moved in front of the lodge, shielding the doorway. A rider approached. Alone. Dressed in a long dusted coat, silver badge glinting beneath it. He dismounted slow like he had all the time in the world, then removed his hat. His eyes locked on Hawk. You're a hard man to find, Elias the Marshal said. Willa turned sharply toward Hawk. Elias Hawk didn't move, didn't blink. Name's Chaska now, he said quietly. Not in my book, the Marshal replied. Elias Ward, former Union scout, went rogue after the siege on Red Hill, disappeared with a bounty on your head the size of a mining town. The air dropped 10 degrees. Even the wind seemed to pause. Willa stepped back, stunned. You didn't tell me. I didn't want to be that man anymore, Hawk Elias said. I left that name behind. Problem is, the Marshal said a man can outrun justice, but never his own name. Willa stared at him. What did you do? Elias turned to her slowly. There was a raid, he said. A village full of families, Lakota Apache, my people. The army called it a sweep. I called it a massacre. I warned them. They didn't listen. So I burned the supply lines, freed the captives, took bullets for it. He paused. Then I ran, changed my name, swore I'd never raise a gun for another man's cause again. The Marshal stepped closer. Doesn't matter what you thought was right. You abandoned post, turned your weapon on fellow soldiers. I turned it on murderers, Elias snapped. Willa stepped between them. You came here for him now. After all this time, the Marshal sighed, suddenly tired. I've been chasing his trail for years. Every time I got close, he vanished again. But now he's settled. Got a kid. A woman. I'm not his, Willa said, not kindly. The Marshal gave a half smile. You're here, ain't you? She didn't answer. Elias stood straighter. You plan to take me in, not today, the Marshal said. Not with a child just rescued and a tribe's blood on your boots. Then why show up to give you a choice, the Marshal said. You've got until sundown tomorrow. After that, I come back. And I bring men. What happens next will be a matter of paper and law. Elias nodded once. Understood. The Marshal remounted. He tipped his hat to Willa, then turned the horse and rode off without another word. The silence left in his wake was sharp enough to cut. That night, Elias packed his saddlebag in the barn. Willa stood just inside the door, arms crossed. You weren't going to tell me. No, he said, because I knew what it would mean. She walked forward. What does it mean to you that you deserve better than a man with a price on his head? I don't care about the bounty, she said. I care that you keep disappearing. That every time I start to believe we could build something, you put up another wall. He looked at her, something breaking behind his eyes. I'm not a man made for peace. No, she said, but you're a man trying to be. He looked away. I'm tired of running, Willa. Then stop. It's not that simple. Yes, she said, stepping closer. It is. Stay. Face it. Tell the Marshal your side. Maybe it doesn't end clean, but it ends honest. He stared at her, torn. I've lived under a borrowed name for so long, he said. I don't know who I am without it. Then maybe it's time to remember. By morning, the sun cut through the clouds, cold but clear. Elias stood in the clearing, saddled but not riding. Luke ran from the lodge, stopping just short. You going again? Elias knelt, opened his arms. Not today. Luke hugged him tight. Willa watched from the porch. Her eyes met his. Marshall's coming, she said. I know. What are you going to do? He stood tall. Tell him the truth. Willa nodded. Then I'll be right beside you. He smiled, the first real one in days. They waited together, the past for once riding toward them instead of away. The town of Copper Hollow didn't welcome strangers kindly, especially ones escorted by a marshal with shackles around their wrists. Elias kept his head down as they rode into the center square where folks stopped sweeping porches and polishing windows just to stare. Whispers followed him like a second shadow. He could feel their suspicion coat his skin, familiar, bitter, expected. Willa rode just behind him, her back straight, her jaw set. Luke sat in front of her, silent, but watching everything. Emmeline stayed behind at the lodge to avoid drawing attention. That had been the plan. But now Willa wished she'd asked her to come. The marshal led them through the gate of the town courthouse, a squat brick building that stank of mildew and self-importance. Inside, a thin clerk with oily hair and too many keys fumbled through paperwork until they found Elias's case file. The marshal handed over a folded report. Charge him under desertion, obstruction, and hostile action against federal troops, he said. The clerk raised an eyebrow. This one's old. War crimes don't age out, the marshal replied. Willa stepped forward. He saved lives. Not just mine and Luke's. There's more to this story. The marshal didn't look at her. Tell it to the judge. They put Elias in a holding cell behind the courtroom. Nothing more than iron bars, cracked tiles, and a cot stuffed with straw. Willa sat on the other side, her hands curled around the bars. You okay? She asked. I've slept in worse, he said. You don't look like you've slept at all. Elias smiled faintly. Too many ghosts walking through my dreams. Willa reached through the bars and took his hand. I'm going to find a way to help. He looked at her, surprised. You don't have to. Yes, she said firmly. I do. He didn't argue. He just nodded, a quiet thank you caught in the wrinkle of his brow. The next day, the trial began. The courtroom was small, packed with townsfolk, and the stale smell of coffee. The judge, an older man with nicotine-stained fingers, leaned back in his chair as the marshal presented his case. Elias Ward deserted his post during a sanctioned Union campaign, the marshal said. He then burned supply lines, released prisoners, and assaulted 3 soldiers. The army labeled him a rogue agent and outlaw. Willa stood before they could continue. With respect, Your Honor, may I speak? The judge raised an eyebrow. You're not counsel. No, she said. I'm a witness. The courtroom murmured. The judge motioned. You get 5 minutes. Willa stepped forward. She wore her best dress, her boots polished. But it wasn't polish that held the room, it was her voice. He's not a traitor, she said. He's a man who saw wrong and refused to be part of it. She looked around the room. You talk about rules and orders. But what happens when those rules protect murderers? When those orders lead to children dying in their mother's arms? The marshal interjected. He broke his oath. So did the men who slaughtered women and called it pacifying savages, Willa fired back. You didn't come for them. You came for the man who said enough. The judge tapped his gavel. Order. Willa swallowed. Her hands trembled, but her voice held. I lost everything in a fire started by men in uniform. I know what it means to be abandoned by those who were supposed to protect you. But Elias Chaska, he didn't run from duty. He ran from injustice. And I'd stake my life and my son's on the kind of man he is now. Silence followed. Elias bowed his head, emotion flickering in his eyes. The judge leaned forward. Marshal, is there any record of casualties tied to his actions? Oh, sir, the marshal admitted. Only damage to property and 3 wounded. The judge looked at Elias. Do you regret what you did? Elias met his gaze. No. I regret not doing more. The judge sat back. Court will recess for deliberation. Outside, Willa paced the porch. Her hands ached from clenching and unclenching. Luke sat on the steps, playing with a pine cone, quiet as a shadow. Then a voice spoke behind her. Ma'am? She turned. A man stood there, older, limping, one eye milky with age. He wore a tattered army coat. You spoke about Red Hill, he said. I was there. She stared. You were... One of them, no, he said. I was in the camp when Elias showed up. I had a broken leg. Couldn't move. They were going to leave me to die. He pulled something from his pocket, a medal tarnished and cracked. He carried me 2 miles out, then lit the munitions. Never said a word. Willa's breath caught. Why didn't you come forward before? He looked down. Because I was afraid. But maybe it's time the truth had a louder voice than guilt. She pulled him inside. Back in the courtroom, the old soldier testified. His words were slow but sure. I saw that man save the lives of people no one else cared about. He risked everything. And I've carried that with me for 20 years. The judge listened in silence. When he rose to deliver judgment, the room went still. Elias Ward, the judge, said you are guilty of desertion and insubordination. But in light of new testimony, the court finds that your actions were not criminal in nature but born of conscience. He paused. You are hereby released. No further charges will be filed. Willa's knees gave slightly. Luke let out a whoop. Elias simply stood, stunned. For the first time in years, no chains, no shadows, just breath. That night they stayed in town. The innkeeper gave them a room for free, citing the speech that shook the plaster off the walls. Willa sat by the fire, Luke asleep beside her. Elias stood across the room, staring out the window at the stars. You could leave now, she said. I know. But you're not. No, he said. I've outrun a lot in my life. But not this. He turned to her. You gave me back my name. She smiled. I didn't. You earned it. He crossed the room and sat beside her. I want a life, Willa. One where I don't have to hide. One where we build something that lasts. Her fingers brushed his. Then let's start. He looked at her eyes full of something real. Tomorrow, no, she said, leaning in. Tonight. The Montana morning cracked wide open with blue sky and peace, the kind of peace that felt earned. The ranch, rebuilt plank by plank, hummed with a rare kind of stillness. Willa watched from the porch as Elias and Luke moved along the fence line checking posts, fixing the slack in the wire. The sound of laughter, untroubled, unguarded, rose like smoke into the cold air. She smiled, pressing her hand to her belly, not from habit, but hope. Inside the stove hissed with rising coffee. Emmeline sat by the window, peeling apples, humming something old and soft. The quiet felt sacred, hard-won, like the kind of silence that only comes after you've fought for it. Elias had been sleeping better. No more middle-of-the-night starts. No more fingers twitching toward ghosts. He still stood watch at sundown, but now he did it with a mug of tea, not a rifle. They had made it through the fire, the trial, and the ghosts. Or so they thought. Because peace, like any good storm, always breaks just before it's tested. It began with the letter. It arrived mid-morning, dusty and creased, delivered by a rider who didn't stay long enough to speak. Willa opened it, hands steady, until she read the name at the bottom. Tobias Kane. Elias is passed. She found Elias in the barn, oiling the saddle leather. "Something came for you," she said, handing him the envelope. He read it. Slowly. Silently. Then his shoulders dropped, not with fear, but with that old, tired weight he'd carried for years. "What is it?" she asked. He handed it back. The letter was short. "I kept my distance because I owed you that. But debt has a way of curdling when it sits too long. Meet me at Black Ridge in 2 days. We've got a balance to settle." "Tobias was my closest friend during the war," Elias said. "We both survived things we shouldn't have, and we both did things that changed us." "Did you betray him?" "No," Elias said. "But I walked away when he needed me most." Willa stared at him. "So why come now?" Elias looked out across the ridge. "Because the past always comes back. It just waits until you're happy enough to care." The next night was quiet, but not in the good way. Willa couldn't sleep. Neither could Elias. They lay in silence, each pretending for the other's sake. In the morning, he packed. "I'm going," he said simply. "I figured," Willa said, "but not alone." "Willa, no," she said, jaw set. "You don't get to walk into whatever this is without backup. It's not your fight." She grabbed his wrist. "It is if it touches what we've built." He saw it then, what she wasn't saying. "You think he's coming for the ranch?" "I think," she said, "you owe him something, and men with old debts don't come to talk." Black Ridge was a jagged scar on the landscape. Charred trees, scorched earth, and stones that remembered fire. A place where 2 men could meet and no one would overhear. It was the site of their worst campaign, where 100 men rode in and less than half crawled out. Tobias stood at the top, rifle resting on his shoulder, smoke curling from the cigarette between his teeth. He looked older, meaner, but his voice was calm. "You really came?" Elias dismounted, hands empty. "Didn't think I had a choice." "You don't." Willa stayed on the horse, watching. Tobias's eyes flicked toward her. "She yours? She's mine. And the boy?" Elias didn't answer. Tobias grunted. "That answers that." He stepped forward, slow, calculated. "You remember this place? Hard to forget," Elias said. "We buried 14 men right here," Tobias said. "You and I dragged their bodies out under gunfire. And after all that you walked, you told me to go. I told you to finish what we started." "I did," Elias said. "I built something better. Without me." Elias was quiet. Tobias's face tightened. "You think forgiveness comes free, that your quiet life erases everything." "I don't want forgiveness," Elias said. "I want it to end. Then give me what I'm owed." Elias frowned. "What does that mean? I want a stake. Land. A cut of the ranch. Half." Willa's breath caught. Elias shook his head. "That's not yours to take." "You wouldn't have it without me," Tobias said. You wouldn't have survived this long if I hadn't dragged you bleeding from the river. You owe me, Elias stepped forward, voice rising. I paid my debt in blood. I've lost years, names, and people I'll never see again. You want more? Tobias raised the rifle. I want what's mine. Willa slid from the saddle, revolver drawn. Put it down. Tobias turned. You threatening me, widow? I'm not a widow anymore, she said, and I don't miss. They stood locked. Wind howled between them. Elias raised his hands. No one has to die today. Tobias laughed bitterly. Says the man who left me dying. Willa's voice cut in. If you're so desperate to belong to something, maybe it's time to build your own instead of stealing someone else's. Something flickered in Tobias's face. Hurt, maybe even shame. But he didn't lower the gun. Elias took one step forward. If it'll end this, take the back acres, he said. 25 head. Enough to start. Tobias blinked. You serious? Yes. But after that, we're done. Silence. Then Tobias lowered the rifle. That's the Elias I remember, he muttered. He turned, walked back to his horse, and mounted. Before riding off, he glanced over his shoulder. You ever go back on that offer, I'll burn the whole place down. Willa raised her revolver. And I'll be the one pulling the trigger next time. He tipped his hat and rode out into the haze. The ride home was silent. At the gate, Elias stopped staring at the ranch. I gave away part of it. You gave away something old, Willa said, so the rest could grow. He nodded quiet. Luke ran out to meet them, arms wide, joy in his stride. They dismounted, held each other, and under the sky that refused to judge, they went home. Snow lingered on the ridge long after spring had begun to bloom in the valley below. The land Tobias now occupied, a gift given with clenched teeth and open hands, was hard and rocky, more ash than earth. Elias knew that. He also knew Tobias was too proud to admit he couldn't tame it alone. The boundary line between their properties was marked by an old split-rail fence, half of it sagging, half of it rebuilt. Every morning Elias rode past it. Every evening he stopped just short. Watching. Waiting. Willa noticed. You waiting for him to mess it up or prove you wrong, she asked one night as they cleaned tools in the barn. Elias didn't answer, because he didn't know. He hasn't caused trouble, she added. Yet, Elias said, he's working that land. Elias sighed. With fists and fire. That land needs care, not vengeance. Then offer help, she said, before it turns into another war. He looked at her eyes, tired. Sometimes peace takes more courage than war. The next week brought trouble, just not the kind Elias expected. A rider from town brought news someone had poisoned the water troughs at the edge of Tobias's claim. 3 cattle dead, another blind in one eye. Tobias blamed Elias. Elias didn't blink when he heard. I didn't go near his herd, he told the rider. That won't matter much to him, the man replied. He's coming down the ridge tomorrow. When Willa heard, she didn't flinch. Then we'll meet him halfway, she said. The next day the sun rose sharp and cold. Tobias rode down with 2 men, both strangers, both armed. He dismounted at the gate, face like stone. You do this, he asked Elias without greeting. No, Elias said. You expect me to believe that I expect you to know I've got more to lose now than I ever did back then. Tobias scowled. Poison doesn't come from nowhere. Maybe not, Willa said, stepping forward. But if you think the man who gave you a start would sabotage it, you've got more venom in your gut than your water troughs do. Tobias's men shifted uneasily. Elias held out his hands, palms up. Let me help you find the real cause. You think I need your help? I think you're smart enough to know this land don't care who's right. It only cares who works it best. Tobias studied him, then gave a slow, begrudging nod. You've got 2 days. The investigation wasn't hard, just quiet. Elias and Willa walked the boundary line, checking for signs of tampering. They found footprints near the northern fence line, too small for any of Tobias's men. They found tracks leading back toward town, not the ranch. On the second day, Willa found the source, a half-empty jar of grain soaked in foxglove buried near the creek. Not Tobias's grain. Not theirs either. Elias narrowed his eyes. Sabotage? Who'd want to turn you two against each other, she asked. Someone who remembers who we were before we changed, Elias said. Willa dusted off her hands and stood. Then we show them what we are now. That night, Tobias returned, arms crossed. Elias tossed the jar at his feet. Not me. Not you. Someone else. Tobias picked it up, turned it in his hand. Townfolk never liked the idea of 2 old ghosts making peace. Then we show them we're not ghosts anymore, Elias said. You offering partnership, I'm offering truce. Labor supplies and a shared irrigation line. Tobias raised a brow. Why? Elias looked toward the horizon. Because peace takes more courage than war. And I'm tired of being brave the wrong way. Tobias spit into the dust, then extended his hand. Elias took it. Over the next weeks, things changed. They built the irrigation together side by side. Willa and Emmeline taught Tobias's men how to prep winter crops. Luke spent his afternoons between both ranches riding a mule named Thunderhead that Tobias gifted him. They even hosted a joint branding day with neighbors from 3 miles out, watching like it was theater. At one point, someone shouted, "Ain't that the Kane boy and Elias Ward working together?" To which another replied, "Hell must have froze." But laughter followed, and respect if cautious. Willa watched it all from the porch, heart full and wary. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Tobias came by. No gun, no demand. He handed Elias a flask. "For your trouble." Elias raised a brow. "What trouble?" Tobias grinned. "That peace you keep preaching. It's hard." Elias nodded. "But worth it." Tobias looked toward the horizon where the fence they once fought over now held a shared irrigation pipe running clean and steady. "I didn't think I'd be the kind of man who'd build something with you," Tobias said. "But I reckon I'm tired of dying on every hill." "You're not the only one," Elias replied. Willa leaned against the doorframe, arms folded. "You two planning on founding a church or just the world's grumpiest co-op?" They laughed, and something light passed between them. Not friendship, not yet, but something close. Late that night, after Luke was asleep and Tobias had gone, Willa asked, "Do you trust him?" Elias didn't answer right away. "I trust that he wants to live more than he wants to fight." She slid closer in bed. "That's enough, it has to be," Elias whispered. "Because if we keep preparing for war, we'll never know how to live in peace." She rested her head against his chest. "Then let's start living." He kissed her forehead. "We already did." The peace between Elias and Tobias was fragile, but it held. For weeks, the valley seemed to hum with quiet purpose. Fences were mended. Irrigation flowed clear. Neighbors started to tip their hats instead of crossing the street. Then came the wagon. It arrived just before dusk, kicking up a plume of dust down the old logging road that led past the canyon. Tobias was the first to see it, A heavy wagon pulled by two mules driven by a tall man with hard eyes and a woman beside him, who didn't smile once. They didn't stop at the ranch. They passed right by, climbed the ridge above the newly claimed acres Tobias had been breaking with his bare hands, and planted a stake in the earth. A claim. By the time word reached Elias and Willa, Tobias was already pacing the field with fire in his eyes. "They're saying the land's theirs," Tobias growled, eyes narrowed as the sun burned low behind him. "Got a deed older than bones." Willa took the parchment he held and examined it. The seal was faded but legitimate. The name at the bottom read, Silas Kane, a name Tobias hadn't heard in over 20 years. My Uncle Tobias muttered. "Dead, or so I thought." Elias frowned. "If this holds up in court, the land's not yours to give." "No," Tobias snapped. "But it was mine to work to bleed for." Willa stepped between them. "Then fight it right. Don't make it a war." Tobias clenched his jaw, eyes still fixed on the ridge. If he wanted it, why wait until now? "Because now it's worth something," Elias said. The next morning, Elias rode to town with Tobias to meet the magistrate. The courtroom was packed with curious eyes, old-timers, land barons, and those who never liked seeing Kane and Ward on the same side of anything. Silas stood tall before the bench. His voice was steady, his suit finely pressed. "This land was left to me by my brother, who died in the war," he said. "No legal claim ever rescinded it." Tobias stepped forward, face flushed. "You never wanted it. You abandoned the family and the name." "I left because our name was cursed," Silas said, "and it still is if this man represents it." The judge raised a hand. "Both sides have presented their case. I'll need time to review these documents." As they left the courthouse, Tobias spat in the dirt. "He's not Kane blood. He's Kane poison." Back at the ranch, Willa kept Luke close. Something about the air felt off. The dogs barked longer at night, ears pinned. She caught the glint of binoculars in the trees, once just a flash of sun on glass, but didn't tell Elias. Not yet. Then Luke went missing. 1 minute he was helping Emmeline collect eggs. The next he was gone. The basket lay tipped on the grass, eggs shattered like teeth on a barroom floor. Willa's scream pierced the still air. Elias bolted from the barn, mounting Raven before his boots were laced. Tobias arrived within minutes, rifle slung over his shoulder, a grim look on his face. "He's got him," Tobias said. Silas took him. Elias's voice was taut. "Why would he take a child?" "Because war don't always look like bullets," Tobias muttered. "Sometimes it wears your own blood." They rode hard for the canyon. The wagon was still there, parked beneath a crooked pine. No smoke, no sign of fire, no sign of Luke. Then Elias saw it, a rope ladder tied to a tree, its end vanishing over the cliff's edge. "He's down there," Tobias said. Willa moved to climb, but Elias held her back. "I'll go." Each rung of the ladder creaked like a warning. At the bottom, shadows stretched long across the stone. A cave mouth yawned open, faint orange light flickering within. Elias stepped inside. There, cross-legged and calm, sat Luke, chewing jerky lantern light dancing in his eyes. Silas Kane sat beside him, unarmed. Elias didn't hesitate. "Step away from him." Silas looked up, face unreadable. "He's not hurt. I was talking to him. That's all. You kidnapped him." "I brought him here because he was scared," Silas said. "You made him afraid. I wanted to show him there's another way." Elias pulled his revolver. "Blood may bind, but it's truth that saves. And the truth is that boy is mine." Silas stood slowly. "He's got your grit, I'll give you that." But he also listened. Not every child listens. Because not every child's taken from his home, Elias growled. Luke stood then, eyes wide but calm. He walked straight to Elias and grabbed his hand. I wasn't scared, he said softly. I knew you'd come. Elias didn't lower the gun. You leave this canyon. Tonight. For good. Silas nodded. For his sake. And maybe yours. At the top of the cliff, Tobias paced like a caged animal. When Elias and Luke emerged, Willa ran forward, scooping the boy into her arms. She was crying before she even realized it. Tobias stepped forward. Did he touch him? Elias said. But this is the last time he sets foot near us. They returned home in silence, dust clouds rising behind them like smoke from a fire that hadn't burned out, just shifted places. That evening, a courier arrived from town. The magistrate's ruling, he said, handing Elias a sealed envelope. Willa opened it as Elias read silently. Tobias stood behind him, breathing like a bull in heat. After consideration of the Cain deed and review of the property's use, Elias read aloud the court rules in favor of the plaintiff. Land is awarded to Silas Cain. Tobias's fists clenched. Elias continued. However, due to the decade-long abandonment and recent rehabilitation by the defendant, the court grants co-stewardship rights for a period of 5 years. Tobias exploded. I'll never share land with that man. Elias put a hand on his shoulder. Then buy him out. With what? Tobias barked. Sweat and regret. No, Willa said. With your name. Tobias turned confused. Make the Cain name mean something again, she said. Not out of revenge. Out of legacy. He stood there silent, then nodded once. Then that's what I'll do. That night, as stars hung low and quiet, Elias watched Luke sleep, one hand gripping his worn blanket, the other curled beside his face. He called me Papa today, Elias whispered. Willa nodded. He meant it. I never thought I'd have that. You do now. He looked at her. This life we're building, it doesn't come cheap. No, Willa said. But we're paying the right price. He kissed her hand, rough fingers brushing her knuckles. Outside, the wind picked up over the plains, curling around the old fence line, whispering promises that tomorrow could be better if they kept holding on. The first frost came early. It crept in, overnight, silent and cruel, turning the fields into silver ghosts. The squash vines blackened. The corn withered before it could dry. Potatoes froze beneath the earth like forgotten bones. Elias stood over the fields at dawn breath, visible in the still air. Tobias was already there, boot prints etched in frost. Didn't think it'd hit this fast, Tobias muttered. We've got maybe 3 days to salvage what's left, Elias said. After that, it's all rot. Tobias nodded, jaw clenched. Then we better move like hell's chasing us. And they did. For 2 straight days, the valley roared with labor. Willa and Emmeline packed preserves with aching hands, while Tobias's crew worked alongside Elias's ranch hands. Luke bundled carrots with a coat 2 sizes too big and a scarf that dragged in the dirt behind him. Even Silas showed up, quiet, brooding, but there lifting crates with the same hands that had once tried to claim the valley by force. There were no fences that week, no surnames that mattered, just sweat, urgency, and a shared fear that the earth was about to take back everything they'd built. By the second night, the cellar was full, the bins stacked high, but the wind had turned sharp and mean, and Luke, he'd gone quiet. Willa found him curled in bed, his cheeks pale, breath shallow, skin hot to the touch. He didn't stir when she called his name. She screamed. Elias rode like a demon to town, cutting through snowmelt and wind. When he reached the doctor's door, he didn't dismount, just banged his fist on the wood. "Luke," he said breathless. "Fever. Bad." The doctor packed up in minutes and rode back with him. Willa hadn't left Luke's side. She'd been humming something soft and old, a lullaby she couldn't even remember the words, to just the tune her mother used to sing. Her voice cracked halfway through her hands trembling. The doctor examined Luke slowly. He didn't rush. That scared Elias more than anything. "It's pneumonia," the doctor finally said. "Came on fast." "Will he?" Elias started, but the words caught. The doctor met his eyes. "He's strong. But this kind of fever, it takes more than medicine. He needs heat, rest, and someone to sit with him through the dark." "I'll stay," Elias said without a second thought. Willa did too, and Tobias. They took shifts, all three. Elias read aloud from an old Bible, his voice quivering over verses he'd long forgotten. Willa bathed Luke's face every hour, whispering promises of summer and stories of light. Tobias, wordless as ever, sat in the corner, whittling a toy horse out of pine, a gift for a boy who wasn't his blood, but had become something more. On the second night, Silas arrived. He stood in the doorway, hat in hand. His face was tired. "I ain't no healer," he said. "But if you need firewood chopped or a roof patched, I'll stay close." No one spoke, but no one turned him away. On the third night, Luke opened his eyes. Papa Elias leaned in, heart hammering. "Right here, son." The boy's lips cracked open in a smile. "I dreamed we were planting trees. You said they'd grow tall enough to shade the whole valley." Elias smiled through tears. "That sounds like something I'd say." "I believe you," Luke whispered. Then quieter. "You don't have to carry my name to be my papa." And then he drifted back to sleep. He survived. It took weeks, but he did. The frost had taken their crops, but it hadn't taken their child. And in the stillness that followed, something softer took root across the valley. Something more enduring than fences. Something stronger than a deed. Something closer to grace. Spring came late that year, but it came. The creek ran high with meltwater from the peaks. Wildflowers bloomed along the ridges. Tobias finished the new barn with Elias by his side, hammering shingles under a wide, pale sky. Willa planted marigolds beside the porch stairs. Emmeline got new chickens and named each one after someone in town, Doc Sheriff, and even one called Silas that refused to lay eggs. Luke. He ran barefoot through the pasture, his scarf now stitched up and trailing like a flag behind him. One evening he came home with dirt on his knees and a wild rabbit in his arms. "Can we keep him?" he asked. Elias just ruffled his hair. "If he agrees to stay." Silas Kane left in May. He sold his half of the land to Tobias for $1. No conditions. No letters. Just a single sentence carved into the back of a fence post. "Blood got me here. But truth let me leave." No one chased after him. No one needed to. That summer, the Ward Ranch changed. Not in size, not in fortune, but in spirit. Neighbors stopped by more often. There were community meals, branding days, Sundays with coffee on the porch and kids playing under the cottonwoods. And the name Kane didn't make people flinch anymore. Because Tobias wore it different now. He wasn't trying to outrun it. He was rewriting it. One evening, Elias and Willa sat on the porch while the sun slipped behind the hills. The wind was warm. The fields were green again. The world, at least their small corner of it, felt whole. "I used to think land was the only thing that mattered," Elias said. Now I know it's the people standing on it. Willa smiled, leaning into him. And we're still standing. He looked out where Luke and Tobias were racing sticks in the irrigation ditch. I never thought I'd be the kind of man who raised a boy like that, Elias whispered. You didn't raise him, Willa said. You met him halfway. He kissed her temple. That's all we ever needed, wasn't it? Someone to meet us halfway. As the last light faded and the first stars blinked to life, the wind carried the smell of hay and river water. Elias sat quiet, heart full. They had weathered frost, survived loss, fought ghosts, and in the end, they hadn't won anything by force. They had chosen each other, and that had made all the difference. Because home wasn't land, it wasn't blood. It was who stayed with you when the sky cracked open and the nights got cold. And when stories were passed down years later about Elias Ward and the widow Willa, about the Cain name redeemed about a boy who once got lost in a canyon and came out calling a stranger father, no one talked about deeds or fences. They talked about the frost and how somehow love still bloomed after it.